People constantly discover patterns in languages they speak and extrapolate from what they see. It's how the verb dive, which always had a regular past tense form dived, ended up evolving an irregular past tense form dove in some varieties of English, on analogy with drive drove and weave wove. And the verb catch, which was borrowed from Anglo-Norman French, got the irregular past tense form caught, on analogy with irregular verbs such as teach, taught. The imaginary native speakers of a Conlang could end up doing this as well, so I have invited Biblaridion of Biblaridion Lang channel to create a little bit of grammar via analogy and show how a Conlanger could make this happen.
Hello everyone, and thanks very much Eva. Now, let's have a look at Itlu to see where and how we can implement some analogy. In Itlu, nouns and verbs are basically two sides of the same coin. Any noun can also be used as a verb. So we could take a noun like l'homme, person, and conjugate it, just like a verb, to make l'homme, I am a person, or l'homme, you are a person, or simply l'homme, for he or she is a person. Since if there's no person marking, it's assumed that the verb has a third-person singular animate subject. And if you want to make a noun from a verb, no problem. All you have to do is apply the habitual aspect suffix to the verb stem, and it can now be used as an agent noun. So lismiper could either be used as a verb to mean he or she teaches, or as a noun meaning teacher. Once a verb is made into a noun in this way, it's able to take all the morphology that nouns normally take, most notably case marking. The phonological form of a noun's case marking depends on whether the noun is classed as animate or inanimate. In the case of these new agent nouns, they are all treated as animate nouns, since semantically they obviously refer to something that has some degree of agency to perform an action, which is pretty intuitive to associate as being animate. So anytime you need a new noun, you can just take a verb and slap on ippe to make an agent noun for it. And since it's so easy to create new nouns in this way, it's an extremely productive strategy. And once this pattern has been established, all we have to do to implement analogy is apply the pattern to words it originally had nothing to do with. Eventually, the Itlu speakers may get so accustomed to the idea that the ippe suffix turns verbs into nouns that now, wherever they see a word that happens to end in ippe, they assume it was derived from a verb, even when it wasn't. So if otlippe is wasp, then it must come from the verb otli, which would mean something like to sting, and ketmippe, foreigner or stranger, must have a verbal counterpart, ketmi, which would mean to visit. Even though the assumed etymology of these words was entirely incorrect, that didn't stop the new coinages from spreading, and this simple mistake allowed a whole bunch of new verbs to enter Itlu's lexicon. This type of analogy is called back formation, and it occurs when parts of a word are reanalyzed as being affixes to which they are, by sheer coincidence, phonologically identical. This crops up all the time. In English, we're so used to the tion suffix turning verbs into nouns that it was only natural to assume that the words automation and resurrection must come from the verbs automate and resurrect, except that these words never actually existed beforehand. But after their usage was codified and accepted, that doesn't really matter anymore. But analogy can result in a lot more than the creation of new words. If one pattern is allowed to spread at the expense of another, it can end up changing the entire inflectional paradigm. In the old days of Itlu, all plurals were formed by reduplicating the final syllable, except for the agent nouns, where the third-person plural animate subject marker was used instead. So while limisippe could mean he or she teaches when used as a verb, or teacher when used as a noun, limisipoli could mean either they teach or teachers. When this innovation first occurred, the Itlu speakers didn't think much of this difference, as these special nouns were understood as coming from verbal roots, and so it wasn't too strange that they behaved slightly differently to other nouns. But as the centuries passed and the meanings of words and their morphology drifted, the relationship between the now very common agent nouns and their verbal ancestors became a little less transparent. And looking at their language from the standpoint of its current state, the Itlu speakers may notice that there are effectively three ways to pluralize nouns. One formed by reduplicating the final syllable, as happened with all nouns in the old days. one by geminating the final consonant, and one by adding the syllable li to the end of the word, which only happens in animate nouns. Of course, from a historical perspective, this li suffix began as the third-person animate plural marker, but the average Itlu speaker doesn't know or care about their language's history. They'll just see an obvious pattern present in the language as it exists now. And so it may be apparent to them that, since many animate nouns are pluralized this way, li must be a plural marker, and so nouns which have no history of being agent nouns will be reanalyzed as having a plural formed by removing a word final schwa, if there is one, and adding li. As always, there are a few exceptions, especially among words that are used often enough to resist adopting the new pattern, but these are now viewed as irregular. However, this pattern only applies to animate nouns, since all agent nouns were treated as animate in the old days, and so all inanimate nouns still fall within the original pluralization pattern. So, what we've ended up with is a way of making new verbs out of nouns, and a way of marking nominal plurals derived from verb inflections, all without resorting to any new morphology. All that happened was the Itlu speakers forgetting and reinterpreting their language's history. Grammar from nothing? How about grammar from less than nothing? Well, that's about all from me. Thanks again for having me, Eva.
Thanks for a cool new piece of grammar. And you all should check out Bibliarion's channel. He has an entire tutorial series on how to create a conlang on there.